his moments. I mean, but it was one of them things where if you really watch the fight, you could say, well, okay, well, Kell Brook could have stole a couple of rounds, but I just thought that Errol Spence in most of the rounds was doing more work, and I just thought he was clearly his punch count and his land and how he was landing his punches looked a little bit better. Now, Kell Brook did rock him a couple of times, but I just thought that Errol Spence was clearly winning the fight. Now, I've seen a couple of holes. In his.
What holes did you see in Errol Spence?
Well, I seen if you stand in front of him, you can land some. His defense is a little subpar, and I feel like a guy like Keith Thurman could have some success against him if he fights him on the inside and he fights him up close. Because Errol Spence does when he tries to break down your body, when he's going downstairs, there'll be opportunity to land upstairs. And I do feel Keith Thurman has enough crack in his punches to keep him honest. So I still probably would pick Errol Spence to win that fight, but I wouldn't be surprised if Keith Thurman caught him and hurt him. I can see Keith Thurman dropping him. So I can see them dropping each other. But if I had to pick, I would go with Errol Spence to beat Keith Thurman. But after looking at the fight 3 times, it wouldn't surprise me if Keith Thurman could pull off the upset, because more than likely Errol Spence would be favored. But it wouldn't surprise me if Keith Thurman won that fight.
I agree. I think Keith Thurman is a cerebral fighter. And I think he can punch through Errol Spence high guard, where as long as he keep on touching him, but the older Keith Thurman has gotten, he's becoming a more calculated boxer, like he doesn't punch in flurries as much anymore. He wants everything to have value. So I think if he becomes the more active fighter, I think he'll have a greater chance in that fight. I don't know who I would favor in that fight. Honestly, my knee-jerk reaction obviously is to say, "Oh, Errol Spence wins that fight." But keep in mind, Keith Thurman in his last 2 big fights, Danny Garcia and Sean Porter, he used the entire ring, and Errol Spence has difficulty. As I said in my prediction video, Errol Spence is a train track. He only goes in one direction. And his job is the quickest way to get anywhere is straight. And Errol Spence genuinely believes that in terms of his fighting style. And I think that you definitely can disrupt Errol Spence with movement and angles and having him come to you and picking him off anywhere, just touching him, just pick him off. Pick him off and move. Pick him off and move. Pick him off and move. Whether you're punching at his guard, whether you're throwing a jab to the solar plex, the Floyd Mayweather jab, that'll be there. The overhand Maidana right, the left hook up top, Keith Thurman throws, all those will be available. But you definitely got to go through something to get something. I'm not saying Errol Spence just going to let him hit him, but I think that Keith Thurman's movement in his last 2 big fights, I'll reiterate, he's moved and used the entire ring, whether he's been hurt by a body shot or not. He's used the entire ring. So I think that that can pose a huge threat to Errol Spence.
Yeah, I saw something too, Fred, that I looked at. I said for Keith Thurman to have success against Errol Spence, he would have to go to war. And I think Keith Thurman would be willing to go to war. And he's going to have to go to war. He's going to have to go in there and hit Errol Spence a couple of times early to establish himself, because I feel like the Danny Garcia fight, I thought that he could have finished Danny Garcia earlier in the fight. A lot of people believe that he could have got Danny Garcia out of there. Well, now we know he used the whole ring. He was careful. He was cautious. He did the same thing with Sean Porter, that he was careful and he was cautious. But I think with a guy like Errol Spence, he's a dude, he's going to keep coming until you start cracking him. Now, if you start cracking him, if you start cracking him, it's going to open up, he's going to start thinking. And you want a guy like Errol Spence thinking. Like, you don't want him just getting so much confidence to where he think he can walk through you. I don't see him blowing through Keith Thurman like a lot of people think he's going to do. I think it's going to be a hell of a fight. It's going to happen. And I believe that fight is going to surprise people no matter who wins that fight. It's not going to be a cakewalk like a lot of people think it's going to be. Because I've watched Keith Thurman fight enough to know that he's better than what we give him credit for. And to be honest with you, I give him a chance against any welterweight right now at 147, and that includes Manny Pacquiao. And I actually think he would beat Manny Pacquiao.
I see what Keith Thurman has done in his last 4 or 5 fights with Luis Collazo, Bondu, Robert Garcia, all the way down to who he's fought recently, is he wants to win 8 rounds. 7, 8 rounds. It started with the Leonard Bondu, because I even asked him that question. If you go through my channel, I even asked him that question. I says, it looked like you realized you won the fight and you wasn't going to knock him out, so you just cruised. And he says, yeah, that's exactly what I did. I'm paraphrasing what he said. He says, I knew I wasn't going to knock him out. I knew he was going to run, so my job was to go out there and win the round. And once I knew I won the round, I became very normal, cautious, you know. And he did it against, and he did it. He started with Leonard Bondu, and Leonard Bondu, excuse me, and he did it the same thing with Danny Garcia. And I would presume everything, with the exception of Sean Porter. I mean, Sean Porter baptized him. You know, that fight was just, you know, I still get wound up watching that fight. You know, that fight still wounds me up because I try and find more and more ways to see how Porter won that fight. Because at the end of that fight, I had Porter winning that fight 7-5. So, and I was there. I was at that fight live.
Well, that's fine, and that's funny that you made that assessment about Keith Thurman and the whole Leonard Bondu thing. Keep in mind, Leonard Bondu said that if Errol Spence and Keith Thurman fought, he would pick Keith Thurman to win that fight, and I find that very interesting. And I can break down that scenario why he's not off base. Now, remember what was going on with Floyd and Manny Pacquiao versus similar opponents. When Manny Pacquiao, he stopped Oscar De La Hoya, he stopped Miguel Cotto. Well, the Shane Mosley fight was pretty even. Actually, Sugar Shane Mosley scored a knockdown against Manny Pacquiao, whether you believe it or not. And everybody was just hell-bent thinking, okay, Manny Pacquiao is going to destroy Floyd Mayweather. Well, what happened when Floyd Mayweather got a hold of Manny Pacquiao? Beat him with ease. Beat him with just a check hook and a jab. And so...
And great movement. Great movement.
Yeah.
Great footwork.
So... Leonard Bondu could be on to something, and I'm just saying, like, I gotta admit, I was a prisoner of the moment, you know, when I saw the fight, because it was such a good fight. It was one of the best fights I've seen. So yeah, I was a prisoner of the moment, and I made my videos and stuff. But after I got a chance to keep watching the fight and settle down, I saw some shit in Errol Spence that I didn't like, and that a smart fighter could exploit. And Keith Thurman is a smarter fighter than what we give him credit for. Yes, he got touched up in the body by Sean Porter and
Collazo.
And Collazo. But what happened at the end of the day? He found a way to win those fights. And I think we're not giving Keith Thurman enough credit on his ring intelligence. His ring intelligence is up there.
Yeah.
Now, is it up there with Floyd? Absolutely not. But his ring intelligence is better than what we give him credit for. And like I said, as of today, if the fight was to take place like maybe 4 months from now, to me, I say it's 55-45 in favor of Errol Spence, but you never know when it gets close to fight time. I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk like that. I can see actually Keith Thurman dropping Errol Spence the same way people think that Errol Spence is going to drop Keith Thurman. I'm just keeping it 100.
I mean, Errol Spence might not have any eardrums at the end of that fight. You know what I mean? Between his gloves hitting his ear, between Keith Thurman's hook hitting his glove. Errol Spence is not as good as people say he is, but he as good as they get at 147. Does that make sense? Like,
exactly.
Previously going into this fight, people said Errol Spence is a world beater. He just gonna walk through 147. That's not the case. You know, I believe there's only 2 fighters that has a chance at 147 to beat 2 fighters that has to beat Errol Spence. That's Keith Thurman and Sean Porter. Those are the only 2 fighters I believe have a chance to beat him. And you have to go through hell to beat Errol Spence because his punches are like time and a half. You know, you know how you get overtime and you get time and a half. That's the power of his punches. So you're gonna have to give up something to get something. And the reason why I picked those two fighters is because of their movement, their ability to move, and their ability to make the fight uncomfortable to a certain degree. Sean Porter with his pressure, Keith Thurman with his brain, because Keith Thurman's gonna make the adjustments, and Sean Porter's gonna be relentless. You know, and I think without the holding, Sean Porter beats Kell Brook, and I just think Keith Thurman squeaked out the win according to the judges. So those only two fighters I think has a chance currently right now at 147.
The problem is with Sean Porter, man. I know that you cool with the Porters, but then what I'm saying is Sean Porter. The problem is with Sean Porter, people don't like his fighting style, and I think the judges can come into play in a fight with Sean Porter because of, whether Sean Porter intentionally does it or whether it's by accident. He could just make a good fight. He could fuck up a good fight by his fighting style. A lot of people are not fond of his fighting style.
Oh, I get it.
Do I think he could have some success against Errol Spence? I think he will have his moments, but yeah, the problem is I think the judges would favor Errol Spence just because of his fighting style. He's an exciting fighter, but I do think it would be a war. But the problem is, with Sean Porter's tactics, he can kind of make the fight a little stale. And he says he's going to work on that, and I do think he needs to work on that because basically, man, at the end of the day, we all know judges, they want you, sometimes they don't want to see a fighter that just go in there and try to win. They want to see excitement, and sometimes Sean Porter can slow down the excitement. I didn't enjoy watching his fight with Berto. I just don't like watching him at times, man. Now, the Keith Thurman fight, he made it a good fight, but sometimes Sean Porter he doesn't excite crowds, and sometimes that can have favor with the judges. So if he was going to fight Errol Spence, he's going to have to fight him. None of the WWE shit. And that's the problem with Sean Porter. Now, if he tries to just straight up box, change things, then who knows what happened? It could make 4 or 5 of the year.
Any fight Sean Porter fights at the upper level got a chance to be fight of the year because he ain't going to stop coming. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's just his style. But I will say this. If you make Errol Spence a one-handed fighter, you can disarm him. And I think it takes a lot of discipline to make him a one-handed fighter. I don't know which hand you take away because against Errol Spence, he went from a jab to a great hook. He did that exceptionally well against Kell Brook. So I don't know which hand you take away, but but movement and make him a one-handed fighter to the point where he can't reach with the opposing arm. Well, I mean with the opposing hand. I don't know whether you go to your left or whether you go to your right. You have to do more film study on him. But Errol Spence is beatable. Am I impressed with him? On a scale of 1 to 10, maybe a 7, 7.5. Because Kell Brook was probably a B-level performance for him. For me, it wasn't a great performance, but he did good enough to stop him. But against Keith Thurman, a B-level performance. The performance he gave against Errol Spence, against Kell Brook, I think Keith Thurman beats him. Like that third round when he was just applying pressure with not throwing punches, you can't do that against a Keith Thurman. How can you do that? You just walk forward. I don't know no fighter in the top 2 or 3 on any weight class where you can just walk forward. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know, from heavyweight down to flyweight. I don't know if you can just walk forward and beat a person in the top 2 or 3 at their respective weight class. I genuinely don't know if you can do that. So he has some kinks in his armor. He's a special talent with flaws. And hopefully Derek James has the ability to change that. But if you look back, you still there, Town? Town. Oh, I lost Town. Damn. I'm sitting there talking to myself.